We are live.
All right. Welcome everyone to another spontaneous and unrehearsed newsmaker interview in the EBA series. We're proud to bring you none other than the President and Chief Executive Officer of NERC, Charles Beradesco. And we're right here in his offices on G Street in Washington, D.C. This is the first week of January 2018. Charlie, we came here and interviewed you in the spring of 2013 when you had been less than a year as the General Counsel, the Vice President, Senior Vice President, General Counsel, Corporate Secretary.
Yep.
And it's so nice of you to let us come back again in your more exalted capacities here. And a lot of people get to plan for transitions when they take over an organization, but yours happened pretty much overnight, and you look very calm sitting there, but I was thinking, my goodness, what a large responsibility to fall on your shoulders, like Harry Truman all of a sudden walking into the White House. Could you tell us a little bit of the human interest story as to the events that unfolded?
Well, I don't want to get too much into the discussion
Sure.
of the events,
Yeah, that doesn't matter.
but to step back for a minute, one of the things that we had done over a year ago is developed a succession plan in the event any of our senior officers left the company in a short time period. So I had been designated for some time to be the interim CEO if Jerry had left the company. So I was prepared for that possibility to happen. The other thing that is helped me is, one, we operate the company on an officer-led model. So we have weekly meetings of our officer team. We share a lot of information about the key priorities that are going on at the company. So I was pretty up to speed to most of the key issues that we were facing as an organization, just because of my role as an officer of the company. And then lastly, as the corporate secretary and general counsel and the advisor to the board, I was involved with the board on pretty much every major decision they were making, and so was well up to speed on a lot of issues that someone else might not be, say, coming in from the outside. So for an interim perspective, I felt pretty good about it. The interesting challenge has been, one, of course, it came during the holidays, and as we were talking about before, I'm a singer. My husband and I both sing at Church of the Epiphany right next door to our offices here. And so Christmas is a very busy time period. And so we had a lot of music to learn and concerts to sing and services to participate in. And so that, of course, created a bit of a time issue. And then you may not know, but I've had eye problems. I had detached retina last year, and I just had unsuccessful cataract surgery. And
Unsuccessful?
Yes, unfortunately, yeah. So I'm seeing the eye doctors twice a week now to deal with some of those issues, so we can get some of the eyesight back. And so, really, fortunately, our three levels of support. One, the board has been phenomenal, and our board chair in particular, Roy Thilley, who is in his second year as board chair, really has been a phenomenal support to me. The officer team here is fantastic, and this is a great industry. I mean, you think about how close people are in this industry, what a small world it really is. The number of calls and emails I've gotten from people stopping by just to see how I'm doing, provide offers of support, even around the eye issues, just to see how I'm doing from an eye issue perspective, has really been wonderful. And so, in that sense, it's been a very affirming transition. I mean, obviously not one I wish did not happen, but I feel we are carrying on the best we can.
Does it matter where you're located in terms of the center of power? Because your predecessor was down in Atlanta, which I guess is considered the headquarters.
Correct.
So this is a large office.
Yeah, so about 2/3, 1/3, and so and I'll be going to our Atlanta office actually in a week or so. Again, during the holidays, it was very difficult, both between my eye procedures and the singing, to get down to the Atlanta office, and I felt very bad about that, and I've sent notes to the Atlanta staff saying, I'm coming. So I'm going to be down there week after next to visit for a few days in the Atlanta office, meet with the employees. But before that, I was a regular presence in the Atlanta office. I'm not a stranger to most of the people in that office.
Have you put somebody in place for your prior position?
Sure. So Sonia Mendoza, who is our VP and Deputy General Counsel, is now our interim General Counsel. So she is taking over leadership of the legal department as well as the enforcement group she was previously leading. And we're trying to really be, as lawyers, you want to be careful when are you acting as an executive versus when are you acting as a lawyer, because some of that is privilege and some of that is not. And so we're working our way through that. It's I've been a lawyer for 35 years, and so I often want to jump in and act like the lawyer, and then I need to remember, wait a second, you're not the lawyer today, you're the CEO today, so sit back and listen for a bit.
So you have proven yourself as well steeped in the subject matter, and it's a credit to you that you were pre-selected to take over in case of an emergency. But you have made it an announcement that you don't want to retain it. You want a search committee to find a permanent successor, but yet you've got all the background, the corporate background, the law firm background, the background here. You're running the show so well. Why would you be determined that you don't want to continue with it?
That's a great question. And there are a couple answers to that question. One is I don't have a technical background. I'm not an engineer. My background is, as you know, Gary, from our working together, is much more of a corporate background. I've been in the power industry for some time, and so through osmosis, you get some of the information into your head. My dad was an engineer, computer engineer, but an engineer, and so I have a little bit of that in my mind. But I do think that the person who is the CEO of this organization in a long-term perspective probably needs a bit more of a technical background than I have. I don't think they need to be a technical engineer, but I think some better understanding of the operations of the grid. Do I have that necessary level? Don't know, but right now I'm not that comfortable that I do. But that probably was less important to me than sort of my own planning. I turned 60 this year. I have practiced law for 35 years. I love being a lawyer. And my husband and I talked about this because the board asked me early on, did I want to be a candidate? Part of that was the board is determined to run a very fair process so that everybody is considered appropriately in the process. And if I wanted to be considered as a candidate, then I wouldn't be part of the process on the NERC side. And I went home and I actually sat one night playing within my head, role-playing, what would it be like to be the CEO? And the answer is, at this stage in my life, with what I want to do, that's not really my goal. It's funny, I told Jerry Cawley, our prior CEO, I said at one point recently, I said, I have no mountains left to climb. I've accomplished the things I wanted to accomplish in my career. As you know, General Counsel of a Fortune 200 company, handled incredibly large, complex transactions, led large legal departments. We've developed an outstanding legal and enforcement group here. I feel very satisfied with my career. I don't feel the need to prove anything else. And so I feel my best role for the company right now is to provide good, solid interim leadership, not complicate that leadership with my own application process. And then when a new CEO is selected, to help them assimilate to the company, transition them into the role, and then they'll decide what role I want to play, and that's perfectly fine.
And are you part of the search committee?
Yes.
And are is the ideal head does it change over time as NERC matures and evolves?
I think it does, and I think if you look at our position description, which is public for the CEO position, and compare it to the one that was in place when Jerry was hired, I think you'd see a little bit less emphasis on the technical aspects of the job. NERC, we have, because of over the last 5 years under Jerry's leadership, have recruited a pretty outstanding group of technical people. We have great officers who have deep backgrounds in the power industry. We have amazing staff, particularly in our Atlanta office of engineers, who understand how the system operates, can do the evaluations. So probably not as necessary to have somebody at the CEO position that is the unparalleled technical person. At the same time, NERC's role has evolved in the sense that over time, as the standards have become more stable in terms of the package of standards, as our enforcement processes have become more stable and risk-based, really what's come to the forefront in terms of the work we do is the work of our assessment work. And this is work that's relied upon by policymakers at the federal and state levels in terms of thinking about the reliability of the bulk power system where they're making decisions on policy matters. And that's got much more of a public policy aspect to it than the job had probably 10 years ago. And so I think somebody who understands, or at least can perform well in that environment of testifying in front of Congress, of interacting with policymakers, of thinking about how do you strategically lay NERC in the processes, and yet also maintain the fact that we're not a political organization. We're not policymakers. We are an organization with specific challenges set forth to us in the statute, and that's got to be our focus. So we want to provide good, solid technical information to policymakers, but not be taking political positions or policy positions ourselves, except to the extent they relate directly to reliability.
Well, it sounds like you're saying the technical aspect is less important than before, but yet you were removing yourself from lacking.
Well, I don't. It's not irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's. I would say that, and again, we'll know when we know. I mean,
Sure.
I'm a big believer is that you can have all of the characteristics you want of a CEO or any key officer position, but you're gonna know when you know in terms of the person. I would just say that I think the balance level is probably shifted slightly. But that's not to say that the board won't end up picking somebody with a strong technical background. I would expect they will, at least some background in the power industry. Do they need to know exactly how a relay works? I don't know.
Well, certainly NERC has proven itself now as the mandatory electric liability organization, but at the same token, the challenges on the cybersecurity and the hacking and the advanced technology, the risk threat seems to have people more on edge rather than the blackouts because of tree trimming. And so are you constantly needing to prove yourselves up to the next challenge, and would that require that you do have to have someone who could have some public relations acumen in dealing, getting the governmental leaders and the public and the industry to have confidence in the organization?
Yeah, so maybe two thoughts about that. One is, we do recognize that standards are not the only way to address the evolving cybersecurity threat. You can't prepare standards fast enough. No regulatory body could do that fast enough to deal with the emerging threats that are happening. So that's why we also run the Information Sharing and Analysis Center for the electric industry. So we have deep relationships with the power industry and with federal government agencies, where we're collecting and sharing information to participants in the power industry to provide them with much more timely information about threats as they evolve. So that's something we've recognized for a while. The standards create a framework for companies to think about their cybersecurity, but they don't create a finite way to deal with every threat, and so our Information Sharing Center does that. So to deal with the other question is, I think that yes, because cybersecurity is such an important issue for policymakers, somebody has got to have the ability to stand up in front of those policymakers and talk about it. And Jerry has done that, our CEOs have done that in the past. And so I think, yes, I think a person in this role is going to have the ability to be, in front of policymakers and the industry. I mean, when there are incidents, people want to hear from the CEO. They want to know what NERC thinks about it. So yeah, I think absolutely.
I went back and looked at the interview that we did with you in 2013 and read the article. And at the time, I was thinking to myself, NERC was still like in its infancy as the mandatory ERO when you were new. But then as I read the interview and heard you talk, actually you were saying different, that you had reached a level of maturation that it was like when Sarbanes-Oxley had first been enacted when you were in the corporate world. It was sort of an overreaction to look for every little infringement or possible mistake, whereas you had the find, fix, and track had just finished its first year, and you said it was a success. You said first is the audits, and then the find, fix, and facts, the more minor ticket writing, and then the liability assurance initiative was the next emerging thing. So I don't know whether this is like the post-maturation era, or 5 years later, if you could look back from where you left off there and assess how things were and how they've evolved, and what you see where we are now and where we're headed.
So I'd say on the, so again, I'll put it into 3 buckets. The standards bucket, I would say, we have reached a relative level of maturity in the standards, particularly on the operational and planning side of the standards. But even the cybersecurity standards are relatively stable now. And so you're seeing, in terms of our workload, what we're doing, quarter to quarter with our board, much more fine-tuning around standards. And actually now going back and looking and saying, okay, after 10 years, are there standards we really don't need in place anymore, or are overly prescriptive? So I would say we are in that part of the maturation. So that's one part. On the compliance and enforcement side, I would say on the enforcement side, we have made the move to a more risk-based approach. So we are not, issuing the $2,000 penalties we used to issue. We are focusing our enforcement resources on the higher risk activity or issues that we find, and not focused on those smaller issues. And we've created alternate tracks to deal with issues, really putting the onus back on the companies, right? The registered entities should be the ones fixing these. So we have, in addition to find, fix, and track, we have compliance exceptions, which is sort of a more informal process. We have self-logging now, where companies can, if they've shown they have a good internal control system, they can actually now log their own findings of non-compliance, and they get treated as, through a very informal process, subject to subsequent audit by NERC. So I think on the enforcement side, we've definitely made that move. The compliance assurance side, which is sort of your audits, spot checks, all of that kind of work, we've seen that over the last 4 to 5 years begin transition. That's not probably the same state of maturity as the enforcement side is, but I'm seeing a lot of room for optimism now that we are really beginning to use risk-based approaches with registered entities, and not using a one-size-fits-all approach to our audits or any other kind of compliance assurance activity. So I feel pretty good that we are getting to a point of maturation around compliance assurance. Then on assessments, that's been a real strength for us. I mean, we just issued our long-term reliability assessment, the LTRA we call it, and it was really well received by industry, by the policymakers, our board. And if you look at it, it is a substantially different document than it was 5 years ago. It's much more focused on the bigger issues, on how those issues play into policy implications, all designed to inform policymakers on the kinds of decisions they have to make as they think about this evolving system we have. Right? We have a system that you guys know from your time in the industry. Sure. We've never seen this level of change in this industry. We're used to thinking in decades as an industry. We're not thinking in years or months. And this is a huge change for us. And so giving good, solid engineering-based analytics to policymakers and to industry as we're going through this time, we see that as a key role we play.